Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. You want to know the secret to success? Listen to Mark Twain. He said the secret is eat what you like and let the food fight it out inside. No better place to try Twain's advice than this city, groaning with good food from halal street carts to haute cuisine. And now there's a book with the stories of New York chefs, line cooks, street vendors, and restaurateurs. It's called Food and the City, and its author, Ina Yalof, joins us next. I'm delighted to welcome to the program Ina Yalof. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
And
nice
what
to
a
be here.
fun book this is, Food
Thanks.
in the City. You've written about 13 or 14 books.
This is number 14.
Okay. And you've written about hospitals, about happy women, about being Jewish. I'm guessing all that work made you hungry, and that's where this came from.
Actually, I'm kind of an investigative journalist. My interest was more in people than in food. But I was living in Vermont for a long time. I came back to New York City. And when I got back here, I started to see something different that I hadn't seen when I was away. And that was everybody's eating. But they're not only eating food, they're photographing food. They are tasting each other's food. They're Instagramming food. New York City, it seemed to me, was all about food. And I was looking at lines on the street. There used to be lines to go into the theater, go into the movies. No. Now there's lines to buy a chocolate chip cookie, to buy a hot dog from the halal stand.
Yeah. Very observant of you. And for somebody who's not connected to food in her background, I mean, you talk about you come from Miami Beach and your parents didn't know from a frying pan and an oven.
That's true. I start this book by just talking about my family. And I said I grew up in Miami Beach, the child of parents who never cooked unless you think that throwing a TV dinner in the oven every night is your idea of cooking.
And yet it's clear that you have a great love for the food, but also for the I don't know what to call it, the art of putting it out there for us.
I fell in love with cooking and with the people who are involved in cooking when I started writing this book. I think the one common denominator that they all have is passion, and each person that I met, from the oat to the boss, as they say, was loaded with passion. And that's what they had in common, and it's hard not to fall in love with people and the things they're talking about when they talk with so much passion.
Well, before we leave your background and your non-food background, it gives me a chance to throw in a quote from the great Calvin Trillin that I found talking about his mother and food. He said, Calvin Trillin said, "The most remarkable thing about my mother is that for 30 years she served the family nothing but leftovers. The original meal has never been found."
He's a genius.
Yeah, and a foodie.
Yes.
If you get this book, you're going to notice pretty quickly that there's no Mario Batali, there's no Danny Meyer, there's none of the big names that we might associate with New York food in here, and that was by design, right?
Yes, because first of all, I thought those guys have really, they have been named the rock star chefs, most of them, and indeed many of them are.
Right.
But they've been around so much, and I really was looking for the people who have not been around. And other than maybe Dominic Ansel, who when I interviewed him was just beginning on his way up.
The bakery.
The bakery, well, the Cronut guy, we can talk about him, but he's probably the most well-known name in this book, and everybody else are people that you pass on the street or people who bring food out to you that you never know their name otherwise, but this book has given them a platform to tell some of the most amazing stories.
The stories are amazing. So how did you find them? What were you looking for, or how did you find these folks?
Well, first of all, since I came to this as a non-foodie myself, I decided that I would look for people and ask them questions that I thought my readers would want to know, because most of my readers, maybe they love food, but they don't know the right questions. I didn't know either. So I started looking around. I first made a list. And then I met
And what was on the list?
On the list, I was going to do the rock star chefs, and I was looking for the restaurateurs like Daniel and like all of the big guns. And then somebody said to me, oh, actually, I remember what happened. The first time I walked out of a Subway, and for some reason, cooking onions caught my
a street cook?
Street cook, and I followed my nose, and there's this halal guy. It was not the one that I did in the book, but it's another man, and I just stood back and I watched him, and I thought to myself, I wonder what this guy is thinking, and why is he doing this, and what is he going home to at night? And so I said to him one day, when you're not busy, could I interview you? And he said, sure. It was as easy as that. I stopped. I think the inspiration for the book was Tony Schatz from Shotzi the Butcher.
I want to talk about him.
We will. And I just passed where he was working, and I looked in, and he's just sitting there like this, like he was waiting for me to come in. And I walked in and I started to ask him some questions. And then I realized that nobody really knows these guys. So that was my way.
This is Shotzi, in the book, it's Shotzi the Butcher on the Upper West Side, right?
Yes.
And I have to tell you, Ina, that reading about him almost brought tears to my eyes. And I'll tell you why. You write about him, or he talks to you about going with his car, truck, or whatever, at 4 o'clock in the morning to wherever he goes to pick up the meat, excuse me, to his distributor to pick up the meat, comes back to the store very early and works the whole day. My father, an immigrant from Italy, had a fruit and vegetable market in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And he got up at 2:30 in the morning and drove his truck down to what was then the Washington Market, now Tribeca, it's not there anymore, and get to buy the produce and bring it to his store, which by 5 o'clock had been opened by his brother, and worked there all day till 7 o'clock at night. And my father was about quality, and before anybody ever talked about local and locavore and everything. And that's why he had a successful business and could send 2 kids to college. But when I read about Shotzi, it just reminded me of my father. Tell us more about Shotzi.
Well, one of the things that I loved, and by the way, after I met him, I just walked in and said, I'm thinking about this book. Could I interview you for it? Sure. He's very personable and he's very funny. I said, what is it like to be a butcher in this day and age? First of all, when half the town is vegetarian. But secondly, and the butcher shops are dwindling. And what he said really struck him the most is the fact that he goes to a dinner party and people will say to him, what do you do? And he says, I'm a butcher. And he said, more often than not, they just walk away looking for the next venture partner.
Not interesting.
They're not interested. He said, I can buy and sell half of those people there. And in fact, I probably did. And he talks about the craziness. His story, he talks about the Upper East Side woman versus the Upper West Side woman, and he talks about people asking him if the meat is grass-fed and is it organic, and
well, he even talks about being asked, is it grass finished?
Yeah.
And he's looking at these people like, what
They're
are you
crazy.
talking about? And I've never heard that expression before, and apparently he hasn't either.
He hasn't either. But the funny story
what do we even know what that means? Grass finished?
I don't know. He said everybody wants to make sure that
they rub AstroTurf on it. Right?
He says everybody wants to make sure that the grass their beef is eating is perfectly pure. So he said, now let me ask you a question. Supposing they're out in this pure grass and a goose flies over and it plops down the goose droppings, and the cow eats. Is that grass fed? Is that organic?
Is that what you want?
Yeah, that's what you want.
I love his his rant. I'll call it a rant about people who insist on organic chicken, and he's talking about it. In effect, he's saying it's all bull.
Yes. Yes.
And it was great. I mean, I could almost hear his voice in what you've got in the book.
Well, that's one of the things that apparently I can do pretty well, which is keep their voice. The book is an oral history. So what that means is I interviewed these people on tape, and I asked them the questions, they answered. Then I just took what they said, edited it down, and turned it into, it was like polishing gems, you know, when I got the best stories.
Right.
So you don't hear me in there, except at the beginning when I kind of introduce where I am and that kind of thing. But to keep their voices, and there's 53 totally different voices in there, that's what I do.
Another of the voices, and we talked about this, and you talked about it, I mentioned it, such great stories behind the counters and in the kitchens, the places, the diners, us never really see, and the people we never meet. One of them is a Tunisian woman who came over to this country because her family, there was some sort of crisis in her family, and she became the executive pastry chef at Daniel.
At Daniel.
Which is still a 4-star restaurant, isn't it?
Yes, still is. Gaia Oliveira was a 24-year-old woman in Tunisia. She was an economist, and she was working in the equivalent of Wall Street. And she got a phone call from her sister, who lived in New York City, who was a single woman who had stage 4 cancer, and said to her, I can't be treated because I'm pregnant. You have to come to New York. I want my child raised in New York City. And Gaia said, what can I do? I have to go. It's my sister. So she came to New York, spoke no English. She got her mother to help her take care of this baby. When the baby was born, the sister passed away. And she became a dishwasher, and then she became a janitor in the restaurant. And she told the fellow she was working for that she really wanted to work in the kitchen. They let her do that a little bit. And slowly but surely, somebody sent her to Daniel, where she worked at Boulud Sud, and she worked her way up. And within 7 or 8 years, she became the executive pastry chef at Daniel. That is a New York story.
That's a wonderful
There's a lot of those in there. It's amazing.
Here's a New York story. Every July 4th, for maybe the last 10 years, I have a routine. I want hot dogs. So I go to Papaya King on 86th and 3rd, stand there in that little crowded space, have 2 of their great hot dogs, an orange drink, and that's my 4th of July. You've got Papaya King in the book, and I was thrilled to read, first of all, who owns it and how it got there. Let's talk about Papaya King a little.
Okay. Well, the ouner was a man, I think from Greece.
Yeah, it seemed like a Greek name.
Yeah,
Alexander Poulos?
Poulos. It was his Uncle Gus.
Right.
Alex's Uncle Gus came to New York City and from Greece. And he decided, and he went with his friend. He was an entrepreneur. He went with his friends to Cuba. And in Cuba, he had a fruit drink called papaya. Never had had it before.
Okay.
Came back to New York City, opened up a papaya stand on 86th and 3rd Avenue, and nobody came. And he's trying to get everybody to come. Nobody would come. He had women in Hawaiian dresses outside. They're playing ukuleles. Nobody shows up. Now, that at the time was the German area.
Yeah.
So
Yorkville.
Yorkville. And somebody said to him,
Or Yorktown,
Frankfurters.
Yorkville.
You have to have Frankfurters. Frankfurt, Germany. I never even put those two together. So he said, Frankfurters. And so he had Frankfurters and papaya. And suddenly everybody is coming to buy a Frankfurter. If there's papaya, nobody cared.
Nobody cares. And I don't care. I don't particularly care for but the hot dogs, if you can't get to Nathan's in Coney Island, where you have to go is Papaya King on 86th and 3rd. And I was startled, amazed to learn, you're talking about Uncle Gus founds the place. It's 1932.
Yes.
That place has been on that corner since 1932?
Yep.
Unbelievable.
And I love his story about standing behind the counter. This is now Alex, because he's...
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the story where he talks about standing behind the counter. It's 1 o'clock. There's 1 million people who are coming in. Everybody wants a hot dog. Somebody is standing there and they say to him, I want that one. There's like 900 hot dogs rolling around
on the grid. They grill them beautifully.
So he says, that one? No, the third one. The third from the front, the third from the back. Which one are you talking about? And he said, you want to throw him out. But he said, no, customer's always right. And he said, I'll be darned if I'm going to be the one to come between a man and his hot dog.
Smart man. Another of my favorites, I'm giving away all my secrets here,
Good.
is, it is good, about New York food, is Fox's You Bet chocolate syrup. And I was so charmed to see that in the book and learn how it got started and how it got its name.
Right. So that's a great story, too. That's in the chapter called... I can't even remember the name of it, but
you only wrote the book.
There's a whole chapter of people who've inherited their businesses. David Fox is third generation Fox's You Bet.
Well, first I was glad to see that it's the Fox part comes from an actual family name.
It's a family name.
Right.
I said to him, which everybody said, if he had $1 for every time someone says, where did You Bet come from? He would be a rich man, he could quit his job, and there would be no more Fox's You Bet. But he said that his grandfather was an investor. And he one day decided to take as much money as he had and go down to Texas, where he heard that land was really cheap. And at the time, he had Fox's Syrup Company. But it was chocolate syrup, but there was nothing after the Fox's name. So he goes down to Texas. He invests all his money, of course, lost everything. But before he came back, he said he was going to come back with a new name, a new terminology. And they said, what's that? He said, You Bet. So where did that come from? Well, people would say to you, hot enough for you? You bet. Having a good time? You bet. So everything. So he said, all right, let's come back with something. So he came back with the name You Bet, and it became Fox's You Bet.
And it's still being produced in Brooklyn, right?
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
Yes.
And I love that he mentions the first thing that, well, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things that comes to mind if you think about Fox's You Bet at all is he says, everybody's got a bottle of it, a jar of it at home and in the refrigerator, and probably haven't looked at it for 5 years or something. And which is the case with me. I've got a sort of half finished, and it's been there forever. I'm wondering, how do they still make a living? Who uses chocolate sauce?
You do, obviously.
Well, not very often. Not enough to keep him in business.
That's true. He calls those vintage chocolate. He says it's like wine because people have such old bottles of chocolate, You Bet, in their refrigerators.
Right.
They also sell the syrup that goes in snow cones and that kind of stuff. So they sell more, but it's all really, I went to his office to do the interview with him. There is nostalgia everywhere. Mel Brooks did a great story about Fox's You Bet with him, where he tells the story about wanting to be an athlete and be on a football team. And he was Mel Brooks, so he wasn't on the team, but he was the team medic.
I think Mel wrote this piece for
Playboy
or Playboy
Esquire,
or Esquire, one of the magazines.
Yeah. So
about Fox's You Bet.
Exactly. He said every time somebody had what looked like a concussion, they would come off, they'd pull him off the field, and he would give them an egg cream. So, but only made with Fox's You Bet.
It's not an egg cream if it's made with anything else.
That's right. That's true.
And if you don't know what an egg cream is, turn off the television now and get a life. Go to I don't know, where would you, I guess you could go to Sammy's Romanian and get an egg cream.
Yeah, so they have the Fox's You Bet with the gribbiness is on the table when you sit down.
You don't necessarily want to eat there, but you go in and learn what an egg cream is if you don't know. It has nothing to do with eggs, by the way.
Or cream.
Or cream. A New York legend. And Fox's You Bet is a New York legend. Somebody famous, and I can't remember who, said, tell me what you eat and I'll tell you who you are. What do you think of that?
That's interesting. I'm not sure I agree with that because there's now so many places. If you look around New York City, There's thousands. I think there's like 2,000 restaurants or maybe more.
Oh,
and people.
Got to be more than that, I would think.
It's possible.
I don't know.
I should know the number, but I don't. But people now are just as likely to go into the halal, to eat at the halal stand and the greatest al fresco dining where they sit on the corner
Right.
and eat, as they are to go to Daniel. You know, they'll try everything that's new. So I think there's now such a plethora of places to dine that it would kind of be hard to say you are what you eat. At least for me. Or, I mean, I'm not a vegetarian, but I'll go to a vegetarian restaurant. I'm not, and I don't love certain kinds of food, but I'll try it. I've never eaten an oyster. I'll never try that. But I do love the Grand Central Oyster Bar.
You did include the Grand Central Oyster Bar.
I did indeed.
And some people who shuck oysters all day.
The oyster shucker at the Grand Central Oyster Bar has never tasted an oyster.
Really? I read that and I forgot that, yes.
Yeah, he's won the shucking contest 8 years in a row, meaning he shucks them faster than any. They have a national contest. People come to the Grand Central Oyster Bar and they have a contest for who can shuck the most, the fastest, make them look the most beautiful. He's always the winner, but he said if a waiter says to me, you know, what's the best, Louis, what's the best oyster we have? He can't answer that because he said, I never tasted it.
Too queasy, I suppose, about it. You too?
No.
Yeah, I love oysters.
Not for me.
Somebody else said legislation. Laws are like sausages. Better not to see them being made. Did you, in all of this, talking to people in all 5 boroughs, did you ever come across anything particularly repugnant and repellent and unpleasant about the food business?
You know, not so much about the food, but it was a real eye-opener to go in the kitchen and see the way the line cooks work. If you think about it, the line cooks never see the people that they're cooking for. All they see is the little green ticket that says 1 steak medium rare, fish grilled twice, nothing with a head on it, you know, and they have to work like this, and it's hot, and if they are given a bottle of water, they'll pour it over their neck as much as they'll drink it. So to me, to see how these people work and how they are treated, these talk about passion. These people have a passion for food, and they're willing to go through all that.
Yeah, I saw that a couple of summers when I was a freshman, sophomore, whatever in college. I worked in a fairly good restaurant down the shore in New Jersey, and where I worked was in the kitchen. It's pandemonium. Yeah. I mean, it's insane. It's like some 4th ring of hell at the busiest time. And passions can really fly, and our Portuguese chef had a temper, and I saw him pick up a knife this long and go after some guy in the kitchen, you know, over who knows what the argument was about. But this is in the heat of, you know, orders coming right in line. And it's, as you point out in the book, it's tough, grinding work, and it's often not well paid.
Oh, not at all. But these people, they're almost like apprentices, and they're so happy to be working in the better restaurants. Yeah. But the fellow Mackenzie Arrington talks about working for someone who put his fingers in the drawer, or saw his sous chef at the time, saw that Arrington's fingers were in the drawer and shoved the drawer closed anyway, you know, because he was angry at him. And they really go through a lot. Some of them, like the Portuguese chef that we talked about before from Robert, she was put on to washing lettuce for 6 months, something like that.
Punishment. Hands
freezing. You know, it's that kinds of thing but they're willing to do it. Every story starts with a behind the scenes story like that. The stories of the chefs and the line cooks, they pay their dues. Yeah. And man, when you go to a restaurant now, Tony, you really appreciate what you're eating because you know what it's taken out of them.
We have to talk for a minute about Rikers Island. You actually visited Rikers Island and saw them preparing how many meals? This kitchen at Rikers?
First of all, it is the largest kitchen in New York City. So for everyone who's listening, you can go to your next dinner party and say, does anyone know what the largest kitchen in New York City is? They have 12,000 inmates and 8,000 guards at Rikers Island. I was so lucky that they allowed me to come in and talk to the woman who runs the food service.
Paulette Johnson?
Paulette Johnson. I first of all, I've never been in a jail, period. And just the experience, I write about that in my preface to that chapter. I talk about my experience, but I only had 2 pages to write it in, and it was a fabulous thing. So just to walk into that jail and follow the guard down the hall and see the prisoners who have, when they see you coming, they have to turn their head and put it against the wall so you don't see them, they don't see you. And then he walks me through to this amazingly large kitchen, and I see this lovely little 5-foot-tall woman dressed in a nice bright colored suit with a very lilting Jamaican accent. She's the one in charge of making 47,000 meals a day. That's enough to fill, I believe, Yankee Stadium every single day.
That's amazing.
It was amazing.
Did you taste anything over there? Was it any?
No.
No.
I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't
That's
taste.
smart.
I didn't taste anything. I did. One of the things I asked her, because I saw that some of the prisoners, or they want you to call them inmates, were working in the kitchen. They have like a shadow box where all the knives have to be accounted for.
Oh, of course.
And because I said, you know, what if they get knives? She said they don't. Some of them are attached. But, but her story is amazing.
Well, there's so many amazing stories. There's Sushi Nakazawa.
Great New York story.
This is what, a French guy and or an Italian guy and a Japanese guy?
Yeah.
Who, first of all, I was going to say who knows how they met. You read your book, you'll find out how they met. And they have a 4-star sushi restaurant.
There's a documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which many people have watched. Alexander Borgognoni was coming home from late work. He worked at Patsy, his family's Italian restaurant. I think it's in the Bronx. And he came home, turned on television 1 o'clock in the morning, watches this Jiro Dreams of Sushi with his wife. And he said to his wife, I'm going to find that guy. It wasn't Jiro. It wasn't Jiro's son. It was a man who distinctly stood out in the documentary because he cried after making sushi 200 times the same kind, and Jiro finally said, okay, it's good enough. So Borgognoni gets online. He gets on Google. He goes to Google Translate. He finds this guy. He translates a letter, sends it to him, and wants him to come to New York City and open up a sushi restaurant with him. That's a very short version, but it came...
And good that it is short because we're running out of time.
Okay.
But they have a 4-star restaurant
within a month.
In the West Village, is it?
Yes.
And quickly, did you sample food at all over the place, or how did that go?
Some. Some people gave me food. Some people did not. Probably, if you read the book, the best food I ever had was at Cafeteria. It was a place.
I know the place well.
I was there to talk to the man who does the midnight shift. And they came at me at 8 o'clock in the morning with a plate full of deep fried Oreos, ice cream in a shot glass, and something else. And man, I was in heaven.
It is a heavenly book. It's called Food in the City. New York's professional chefs, restaurateurs, line cooks, street vendors, and purveyors talk about what they do and why they do it. Ina Yalof, it's a delight to have you here.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you next time.